downfall. Linda was never the good witch. Gossip and spreading rumors will be your downfall. She threw her in the dead ditch. Jealousy makes you lose everything, that's the cost. How about you just stay in the land of the lost? Besties with the witch of the west. Hate on us, but you're still obsessed. Getting me to be the big bad villain, babe, go get a psychoanalysis. Because I know I'm one in a million, but it's fine, I'll be your protagonist. You're talking too much, we can all hear your whispers. Calling us wicked is a little insulting. You gave them to her, but you can keep the rest with birds. Thought you were a girl's girl, but that's just disgusting. You can call me the bad witch, but I'm not the snitch. So tell me which is which? Which is which? Which is which is which? Mirror on the wall, who's the saddest one of all? Glenda was never the good witch. Gossip and spreading rumors will be your downfall. She threw her into the dead ditch. Jealousy makes you lose everything, that's the cost. How about you just stay in the land of the lost? Besties with the witch of the west. Hate on us, but you're still obsessed. Hating me to be the big bad villain, babe, go get a psychoanalysis. Because I know I'm one in a million, but it's fine, I'll be your protagonist.
32. The Language of Religion. Lewis intended to read this paper at the 12th Symposium of the Colston Research Society held at the University of Bristol in March 1960, but was unable to attend due to ill health. It was first published in Christian Reflections, 1998, although pages 4 and 5 of the text are missing. I have been asked to talk about religious language, and the gist of what I have to say is that, in my opinion, there is no specifically religious language. I admit, of course, that some things said by religious people can't be treated exactly as we treat scientific statements. But I don't think that is because they are specimens of some special language. It would be truer to say that the scientific statements are in a special language. The language of religion, which we may presently have to distinguish from that of theology, seems to be, on the whole, either the same sort we use in ordinary conversation or the same sort we use in poetry, or somewhere between the two. In order to make this clearer, I am afraid I must turn away from the professed subject of my paper for some time and talk about language. I begin with 3 sentences. 1. It was very cold. 2. There were 13 degrees of frost. 3. Ah, bitter chill it was. The owl, for all his feathers, was a cold. The hare limped trembling through the frozen grass, and silent was the flock in woolly fold. Numbed were the beadsman's fingers. I should describe the first as ordinary language, the second as scientific language, and the third as poetic language. Of course, there is no question here of different languages, in the sense in which Latin and Chinese are different languages. 2 and 3 are improved uses of the same language used in 1. Scientific and poetic language are 2 different artificial perfections of ordinary. Artificial because they depend on skills, different because they improve ordinary in 2 different directions. Notice also that ordinary could advance a little towards either, so that you could pass by degrees into scientific or poetic. For very cold you could substitute freezing hard, and for freezing hard, freezing harder than last night. That would be getting nearer to the scientific. On the other hand, you could say bitterly cold, and then you would be getting nearer the poetic. In fact, you would have anticipated one of the terms used in Keats's description. The superiority of the scientific description clearly consists in giving for the coldness of the night a precise quantitative estimate which can be tested by an instrument. The test ends all disputes. If the statement survives the test, then various inferences can be drawn from it with certainty. E.g., various effects on vegetable and animal life can be predicted. It is therefore of use in what Bacon calls operation. We can take action on it. On the other hand, it does not, of itself, give us any information about the quality of a cold night, does not tell us what we shall be feeling if we go out of doors. If, having lived all our lives in the tropics, we didn't know what a hard frost was like, the thermometer reading would not of itself inform us. Ordinary language would do that better. Your ears will ache. You'll lose the feeling in your fingers. You'll feel as if your ears were coming off. If I could tell you, which unhappily I can't, the temperature of the coldest water I ever bathed in, it would convey the reality only to the few who had bathed in many temperatures and taken thermometer readings of them. When I tell you it was so cold that at first it felt like scalding hot water, I think you will get a better idea of it. And where a scientific statement could draw on no experience at all, like statements about optics made to a student born blind, then, though it might retain its proper virtues of precision, verifiability, and use in operation, it would, in one sense, convey nothing. Only in one sense, of course. The blind student could, presumably, draw inferences from it and use it to gain further knowledge. I now turn to the poetic. Its superiority to ordinary language is, I am afraid, a much more troublesome affair. I feel fairly sure what it does not consist in. It does not consist either in discharging or arousing more emotion. It may often do one of these things or both, but I don't think that is its differentia. I don't think our bit of Keats differs from the ordinary "it was very cold," primarily or solely by getting off Keats's chest mere dislike of cold nights, nor by arousing mere dislike in me. There is, no doubt, some mere getting off the chest in the exclamation "ah," and the catachresis "bitter." Personally, I don't feel the emotion to be either Keats's or mine. It is, for me, the imagined people in the story who are saying "ah" and "bitter," not with the result of making me share their discomfort, but of making me imagine how very cold it was. And the rest is all taken up with pictures of what might have been observed on such a night. The invitation is not to my emotions, but to my senses. Keats seems to me to be simply conveying the quality of a cold night, and not imposing any emotions on me, except, of course, the emotion of pleasure at finding anything vividly conveyed to the imagination. He is, in fact, giving me all that concrete, qualitative information which the scientific statement leaves out. But then, of course, he is not verifiable, nor precise, nor of much use for operation. We must not, however, base our view on a single passage which may have been unfairly chosen. Let us begin at quite another point. One of the most obvious differences between all the poetry I have ever read and all the straight prose, I say straight to exclude prose which verges on the poetic, is this simple one, hardly ever stated. The poetry contains a great many more adjectives. This is perfectly obvious. From Homer, who never omits to tell us that the ships were black and the sea salty, or even wet, down to Eliot with his hollow valley and multifoliate rose, they all do it. Poets are always telling us that grass is green, or thunder loud, or lips red. It is not, except in bad poets, always telling us that things are shocking or delightful. It does not, in that direct way, attempt to discharge or excite emotion. On the contrary, it seems anxious to bombard us with masses of factual information which we might, on a prose view, regard as irrelevant or platitudinous. Here, pages 4 and 5 of the manuscript are missing. Page 6 begins as follows. In order to discharge an emotion, it is not necessary that we should make it clear to any audience. By expression, I mean that sort of utterance which will make clear to others how we are feeling. There are, of course, any number of intermediate stages between discharge and expression, but perfect expression in the presence of the perfect hearer would enable him to know exactly how you were feeling. To what extent this involves arousing the same emotion or a replica of it in him, in other words, to what extent the perfect expression would be emotive, I don't know. But I think that to respond to expression is, in principle, different from having an emotion aroused in one, even though the arousing of some sort of phantom emotion may always be involved. There seems to me to be a difference between understanding another person's fear because he has expressed it well, and being actually infected by his fear, as so often happens. Or again, There seems to be a difference between understanding the feelings of Shakespeare's Troilus before his assignation and being infected by similar feelings as the writer of pornography intends to infect us. But the really important point is the third one. Even if poetic language often expresses emotion and thereby, to some undefined extent, arouses emotion, it does not follow that the expression of emotion is always its sole or even its chief function. For even in ordinary language, one of the best ways of describing something is to tell what reactions it provoked in us. If a man says, "They kept their rooms terribly overheated. Before I'd been in there 5 minutes, I was dripping," he is usually not concerned, as an end in itself, with giving us autobiographical fact that he perspired. He wants to make us realize how hot it was, and he takes the right way. Indeed, in the last resort, there is hardly any other way. To say that things were blue, or hard, or cool, or foul-smelling, or noisy, is to tell us how they affected our senses. To say that someone is a bore, or a decent chap, or revolting, is to tell how he affected our emotions. In the same way, I think that poetic language often expresses emotion not for its own sake, but in order to inform us about the object which aroused the emotion. Certainly, it seems to me to give us such information. Burns tells us that a woman is like a red, red rose, and Wordsworth that another woman is like a violet by a mossy stone half hidden from the eye. Now, of course, the one woman resembles a rose, and the other a half-hidden violet, not in size, weight, shape, colour, anatomy, or intelligence, but by arousing emotions in some way analogous to those which the flowers would arouse. But then we know quite well what sort of women, and how different from each other, they must have been to do so. The two statements do not in the least reduce to mere expressions of admiration. They tell us what kind of admiration, and therefore what kind of woman. They are even, in their own proper way, verifiable or falsifiable. Having seen the two women, we might say, "I see what he meant in comparing her to a rose," and "I see what he meant in comparing her to a violet," or might decide that the comparisons were bad. I am not, of course, denying that there are other love poems, some of Wyatt's, for example, where the poet is wholly concerned with his own emotions and we get no impression of the woman at all. I deny that this is the universal rule. Finally, we have those instances where poetic language expresses an experience which is not accessible to us in normal life at all, an experience which the poet himself may have imagined and not, in the ordinary sense, had. An instance would be when Asia, in Prometheus Unbound, says, "My soul is an enchanted boat." If anyone thinks this is only a more musical and graceful way of saying, "Gee, this is fine," I disagree with him. An enchanted boat moves without oar or sail to its destined haven. Asia is at that moment undergoing a process of transfiguration, almost of apotheosis. Effortless and unimpeded movement to a goal desired but not yet seen is the point. If we were experiencing Asia's apotheosis, we should feel like that. In fact, we have never experienced apotheosis, nor probably has Shelley. But to communicate the emotion which would accompany it is to make us know more fully than before what we meant by apotheosis. This is the most remarkable of the powers of poetic language, to convey to us the quality of experiences which we have not had, or perhaps can never have, to use factors within our experience so that they become pointers to something outside our experience. As 2 or more roads on a map show us where a town that is off the map must lie. Many of us have never had an experience like that which Wordsworth records near the end of Prelude 13. But when he speaks of the visionary dreariness, I think we get an inkling of it. Other examples would be, for me, Marvel's Green Thought in a Green Shade, and, for everyone, Pope's Die of a Rose in Aromatic Pain. Perhaps the most astonishing is in the Paradiso, where Dante says that as he rose from one sphere of the Ptolemaic universe to the next, he knew that he had risen only by finding that he was moving forward more quickly. It must be remembered that I have been speaking simply of poetic language, not of poetry. Poetry, of course, has other characteristics besides its language. One of them is that it is very often fiction. It tells about people who never really lived, and events that never really took place. Hence Plato's jibe that the poets are liars. But surely it would be a great confusion to attach the note of fiction to every specimen of poetic language. You just can't tell whether Keats's description is of a winter night that really occurred, or of one he imagined. The use of language in conveying the quality of a real place or person or thing is the same we should need to convey the quality of a feigned one.
I don't care what it takes, nothing will come in my way. The universe can throw all at once at me, stuck to my path I'll stay. Broken away from you, I don't care. I will stare into the sun, slingshot me around where I can find you. I'll be a record breaker. Space itself is no limit for me. I'll be your survivor. Just hold on, please wait for me. Cosmos in my way, I don't care what they say. Supernovae and black holes, get out of my way. At the speed of light, I am searching for you. In the moments to come, I'll break the boundaries for you. For you, I will be your record breaker. Space itself is no limit for me. I will be your survivor, just hold on, please wait for me. I will be your record breaker, space itself is no limit for me. I will be your survivor, just hold on, please wait for me. With the cosmos in my way, I don't care what they say. Supernovae and black holes, get out of my way. At the speed of light, I'm searching for you. In the moments to come, I'll break the boundaries for you.
My long and perhaps tedious digression on poetic language is now almost at an end. My conclusion is that such language is by no means merely an expression nor a stimulant of emotion, but a real medium of information, which information may, like any other, be true or false. True as Mr. Young on Weirs, or false as the bit in Beowulf about the dragon sniffing along the path. It often does stimulate emotion by expressing emotion, but usually in order to show us the object to which such emotion would be the response. A poet, Mr. Robert Conquest, has put something like my view. Observation of real events includes the observer, heart and all. The common measurable features are obtained by omitting this part. But there is also a common aspect in the emotional, shared by other members of the species. This is conveyed by art. The poem combines all these. Because events, as real events, really are, and feigned events would really be if they occurred, cannot be conveyed without bringing in the observer's heart and the common emotional reaction of the species, it has been falsely concluded that poetry represented the heart for its own sake, and nothing but the heart. But I must not go too far. I think poetic language does convey information, but it suffers from two disabilities in comparison with scientific. 1. It is verifiable or falsifiable only to a limited degree, and with a certain fringe of vagueness. Not all men, only men of some discrimination, would agree on seeing Burns's Mistress that the image of a red, red rose was good, or, as might be, bad. In that sense, scientific statements are, as people say now, far more easily cashed. But the poet might of course reply that it always will be easier to cash a cheque for 30 shillings than one for £1,000. That the scientific statements are cheques, in one sense, for very small amounts, giving us, out of the teeming complexity of every concrete reality, only the common measurable features. 2. Such information as poetic language has to give can be received only if you are ready to meet it halfway. It is no good holding a dialectical pistol to the poet's head and demanding how the deuce a river could have hair, or thought be green, or a woman a red rose. You may win, in the sense of putting him to a nonplus, but if he had anything to tell you, you will never get it by behaving in that way. You must begin by trusting him. Only by so doing will you find out whether he is trustworthy or not. Credo ut intelligam, it is time some theological expression came in, is here the only attitude. And now, as I see it, the language in which we express our religious beliefs and other religious experiences is not a special language, but something that ranges between the ordinary and the poetical. But even when it begins by being ordinary, it can usually, under dialectical pressure, be found to become either theological or poetical. An example will best show what I mean by this trichotomy. I think the words, "I believe in God," are ordinary language. If you press us by asking what we mean, we shall probably have to move in one of two directions. We might say, "I believe in incorporeal entity, personal in the sense that it can be the subject and object of love, on which all other entities are unilaterally dependent." That is what I call theological language, though far from a first-class specimen of it. In it we are attempting, so far as is possible, to state religious matter in a form more like that we use for scientific matter. This is often necessary for purposes of instruction, clarification, controversy, and the like. But it is not the language religion naturally speaks. We are applying precise and therefore abstract terms to what for us is the supreme example of the concrete. If we do not always feel this fully, that, I think, is because nearly all who say or read such sentences, including unbelievers, really put into them much that they know from other sources, tradition, literature, etc. But for that, it would hardly be more information than "there are 15 degrees of frost" would be to those who had never experienced frost. And this is one of the great disadvantages under which the Christian apologist labours. Apologetics is controversy. You cannot conduct a controversy in those poetical expressions which alone convey the concrete. You must use terms as definable and univocal as possible, and these are always abstract. And this means that the thing we are really talking about can never appear in the discussion at all. We have to try to prove that God is, in circumstances where we are denied every means of conveying who God is. It is faintly parallel to the state of a witness who has to try to convey something so concrete as the known character of a friend under cross-examination. Under other conditions he might possibly succeed in giving you a real impression of him, but not under hostile cross-examination. You remember Hamlet's speech to Horatio, "Horatio, thou art e'en as just a man," etc. But you could never have had it in a witness box. That, then, is one way in which we could go on from "I believe in God," the theological, in a sense alien to religion, crippling, omitting nearly all that really matters, yet, in spite of everything, sometimes successful. On the other hand, you could go on, following the spontaneous tendency of religion, into poetical language. Asked what you meant by God, you might say, "God is love," or "the Father of lights," or even "underneath are the everlasting arms." From what had gone before, you will understand that I do not regard these poetical expressions as merely expressions of emotion. They will, of course, express emotion in any who utters them, and arouse emotion in any who hears them with belief. But so would the sentence, 50 Russian divisions landed in the south of England this morning. Momentous matter, if believed, will arouse emotion whatever the language. Further, these statements make use of emotion as Burns make use of our emotions about roses. All this is, in my view, consistent with their being essentially informative. But, of course, informative only to those who will meet them halfway. The necessity for such poetic expressions is closely connected with the grounds on which they are believed. They are usually two: authority and religious experience. Christians believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God because he said so. The other evidence about him has convinced them that he was neither a lunatic nor a quack. And now, of course, the statement cannot mean that he stands to God in the very same physical and temporal relation which exists between offspring and male parent in the animal world. It is then a poetical statement. And such expression must here be necessary because the reality he spoke of is outside our experience. And here, once more, the religious and the theological procedure diverge. The theologian will describe it as analogical, drawing our minds at once away from the subtle and sensitive exploitations of imagination and emotion with which poetry works, to the clear-cut but clumsy analogies of the lecture room. He will even explain in what respects the father-son relationship is not analogical to the reality, hoping by elimination to reach the respects in which it is. He may even supply other analogies of his own, the lamp and the light which flows from it, or the like. It is all unavoidable and necessary for certain purposes. But there is some death in it. The sentence, Jesus Christ is the Son of God, cannot be all got into the form, there is between Jesus and God an asymmetrical, social, harmonious relation involving homogeneity. Religion takes it differently. A man who is both a good son and a good father, and who is continually urged to become a better son and a better father by meditation on the divine fatherhood and sonship, and who thus comes in the end to make that divine relation the norm to which his own human sonship and fatherhood are still merely analogical, is best receiving the revelation. It would be idle to tell such a man that the formula, is the Son of God, tells us, what is almost zero, that an unknown X is in an unknown respect like the relation of father and son. He has met it halfway. Information has been given him, as far as I can see, in the only way possible. Secondly, there is religious experience, ranging from the most ordinary experiences of the believer in worship, forgiveness, dereliction, and divine help, up to the high special experiences of the mystics. Through such experience, Christians believe that they get a sort of verification, or perhaps sometimes falsification, of their tenets. Such experience cannot be conveyed to one another, much less to unbelievers, except by language which shares, to some extent, the nature of poetic language. That is what leads some people to suppose that it can be nothing but emotion. For, of course, if you accept the view that poetic language is purely emotional, then things which can be expressed only in poetic language will presumably be emotions. But if we don't equate poetic language with emotional language, the question is still open. Now it seems to me a mistake to think that our experience in general can be communicated by precise and literal language, and that there is a special class of experiences, say emotions, which cannot. The truth seems to me the opposite. There is a special region of experiences which can be communicated without poetic language, namely its common measurable features. But most experience cannot. To be incommunicable by scientific language is, so far as I can judge, the normal state of experience. All our sensuous experience is in this condition, though this is somewhat veiled from us by the fact that much of it is very common, and therefore everyone will understand our references to it at a hint. But if you have to describe to a doctor any unusual sensation, you will soon find yourself driven to use pointers of the same nature, essentially, as Asia's enchanted boat. An army doctor who suspected you of malingering would soon reduce you to halting and contradictory statements. But if by chance you had not been malingering, he would have cut himself off from all knowledge of what might have turned out an interesting case. But are there, as I have claimed, other experiences besides sensation and, of course, emotion, which are in this predicament? I think there are. But frankly, I am now getting into very deep water indeed. I am almost sure I shall fail to make myself clear, but the attempt must be made. It seems to me that imagining is something other than having mental images. When I am imagining, say, Hamlet on the battlements, or Heracles' journey to the Hyperboreans, there are images in my mind. They come and go rapidly and assist what I regard as the real imagining only if I take them all as provisional makeshifts, each to be dropped as soon as it has served its instantaneous turn. If any one of them becomes static and grows too clear and full, imagination proper is inhibited. A too lively visual imagination is the reader's and writer's bane, as toys, too elaborate and realistic, spoil children's play. They are, in the etymological sense, the offal, the off-fall of imagination, the slag from the furnace. Again, thinking seems to me something other than the succession of linked concepts which we use when we successfully offer our thought to another in argument. That appears to me to be always a sort of translation of a prior activity, and it was the prior activity which alone enabled us to find these concepts and links. The possibility of finding them may be a good test of the value of that previous activity, certainly the only test we have. It would be dangerous to indulge ourselves with the fancy of having valuable profundities within us which, unfortunately, we can't get out. But perhaps in others, where we are neutrals, we are sometimes not quite wrong in thinking that a sensible man, unversed in argument, has thought better than his mishandling of his own case suggests. If we lend him a helping hand and he replies, "Of course, that's it. That is what I really meant to say," he is not always a hypocrite. Finally, in all our joys and sorrows, religious, aesthetic, or natural, I seem to find things almost indescribably thus. They are about something. They are a byproduct of the logically prior act of attending to or looking towards something. We are not really concerned with the emotions. The emotions are our concern about something else. Suppose that a mother is anxious about her son who is on active service. It is no use going to her with the offer of some drug or hypnotism or spell that would obliterate her anxiety. What she wants is not the cessation of anxiety, but the safety of her son. I mean on the whole. On one particular wakeful night she might, no doubt, be glad of your magic. Nor is it any use offering her a magic which would prevent her from feeling any grief if her son were killed. What she dreads is not grief, but the death of her son. Similarly, it is no use offering me a drug which will give me over again the feelings I had on first hearing the overture to the magic flute. The feelings, by themselves, the flutter in the diaphragm, are of very mediocre interest to me. What gave them their value was the thing they were about. So in our Christian experiences. No doubt we experience sorrow when we repent and joy when we adore, but these were byproducts of our attention to a particular object. If I have made myself at all clear, but I probably have not, you see what for me it adds up to. The very essence of our life as conscious beings, all day and every day, consists of something which cannot be communicated except by hints, similes, metaphors, and the use of those emotions, themselves not very important, which are pointers to it. I am not in the least talking about the unconscious as psychologists understand it. At least, though it cannot be fully introspected, this region is, in many of us, very far from unconscious. I say, in many of us. But I sometimes wonder whether we may not be survivals. Evolution may not have ceased, and in evolution a species may lose old powers as well as acquire, possibly in order to acquire, new ones. There seem to be people about to whom imagination means only the presence of mental images, not to mention those like Professor Ryle who deny even that, to whom thought means only unuttered speech, and to whom emotions are final, as distinct from the things they are about. If this is so, and if they increase, then all real communications between them and the earlier type of man will finally be impossible. Something like this may be happening. You remember Wells's Country of the Blind. Now its inhabitants, being men, must have descended from ancestors who could see. During centuries, A gradual atrophy of sight must have spread through the whole race. But at no given moment, till it was complete, would it probably have been equally advanced in all individuals. During this intermediate period, a very interesting linguistic situation would have arisen. They would have inherited from their unblind ancestors all the visual vocabulary, the names of the colours, words like see and look and dark and light. There would be some who still used them in the same sense